Before Mike, I was from Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. I was attending the University of Pittsburgh with the first self-design major in women's studies. Started just questioning, what am I doing? And then I got married and I had Mike. And then my course in life was set. My purpose became very clear. He was diagnosed at 9 months with on a discharge summary that said anterior horn cell disease. And I didn't know what that meant. So I saw his doctor in the hall and I went after him and I said, can you please explain this diagnosis to me? It was delivered in a fashion of just like, you're bothering me. We'll talk about this when you make an appointment at clinic. And that, I think so much of it then was just the questions, like, what is his life going to be like? What is this illness? What does this do? What does this mean? And it felt like somebody had kicked me in the stomach. And I went back after him, and just as he was getting into the elevator, and I asked him, is this serious? And as the doors closed, he said, yes, it is. That was my introduction to my son's illness, a moment in time that I've never forgotten. And I think a lot of it actually helped me to become the fighter that I am today. I've always learned that if you don't ask questions or if you don't demand answers, you won't get them. And Mike was, in his own right, just such an incredible fighter. From all of the things that he went through from the time he was very small, all of the pokes and the sticks and the blood work and everything that had to be done when you are initially diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And first, the doctors told me he wouldn't see his first birthday because he was 9 months when he was diagnosed. And I literally watched his chest rise and fall every night and just said, God, if you let him live, I promise I'll take care of him. And what an amazing ride we had. So much of what I did and accomplished and the people we've met in Mike's lifetime were just incredible. I mean, he decided he wanted to be a photographer. So we found someone that was able to splice into 2 string switches so one could focus and the other could shoot. And he started photographing first doors in the neighborhood. The doors of my neighborhood he published on his, he already had computer, even when he was very, very small. And then went on to wanting to photograph celebrities. And one of the first celebrities he photographed was David Letterman. Mike kept shooting and shooting, and Letterman finally looked over his glasses and said, you're getting to be a real pain in the ass, kid. But Mike took that film and he put it in his sock, and he kept it with him all the way back from New York to Florida. So many of the things that Mike did, he always did them in a large way because he felt that to be equal, he had to do more than. Because he knew he was looked at as less than, that he was defined by his disability and not by his abilities. So he always had to prove who he was, and what he could do. When Apple wanted to put switch and scanning built into their operating system, they flew 2 engineers from Cupertino to our house to work with him. And in 1 weekend, that was fixed. After he had been trached, I was worried, how was he going to deal with not being able to speak, because words were very important to him. I mean, when he was little, he was in elementary school and he came home. I picked him up in the van and he started telling me the story of their outing to the swimming pool. Mike, of course, was in a wheelchair, didn't want to get anywhere near a swimming pool and a bunch of screaming, splashing little kids. So this little boy who was a real chunk did a cannonball into the pool, and Mike said he watched the little children in their water wings being sucked into the abyss. He was in elementary school. I mean, his language was never stilted. It was just, that was the way he spoke. His command of the English language was incredible. So in his later years, he edited for 2 publishers, and then Mike was on MSNBC on The Last Word. And the segment that he did was so powerful. He talked about the impact of elections and what it does on the life, what it means to the life of a person with a disability. One time a man approached us, it was starting to get dark, and it was in Tampa, and we're going into a parking garage, and he was a big dude, and he said to me, "Where'd you get the crash test dummy?" well, I eviscerated him and I brought him to tears and I made him apologize. Now, this dude could have probably picked me up and just thrown me against the car and walked away. But it's that fight that mothers have. And I think that that's so much been a part of my life, that fight, that struggle, first for education, to prove that Mike belonged in a regular education classroom and not in a special ed classroom. The fight for a regular diploma and not a special diploma. Mike graduated with a 5.6 GPA, and that's out of a 4.0 because he took weighted classes. We always had to prove what he could do and who he was and why he mattered. And that is a lot of what I want to see. I want to see this world where people do not have to prove their worth and that people don't base an opinion of them about how they look or a thought that because they are disabled, they can do less and they are therefore less than, or that they are a drain on our society because their care costs more. No one would ever say that to Stephen Hawking, but Stephen Hawking had to go through that to prove who he was and what he was. And I feel that way about my Mike and about Asher and about so many others who have had to exceed everyone's expectations because those expectations were so low. I went from feeling sorry to myself and tearful and what kind of life is this child going to have, to being a fighter, to saying right here to all of you, this is not the life that my son is going to have. He's going to have as full a life as he could have. He taught me to live in the moment, to live for today. And when he would have setbacks, I would always say to him, Mike, it's only temporary. I was able to communicate with him at a very early age. He said his first sentence at 18 months. And his first sentence was, read the book. When we would even go to his doctor's appointments, he feared the hospital. And I wanted other doctors to understand that as well. You know, this is what it feels like. If you don't understand what it feels like, how can you tell me, well, the first doctor, like he said, make an appointment with clinic, and then later that he probably wouldn't see his first birthday. I think at that point, I just wanted to prove them all wrong. And in education, it was the same thing. I wanted to prove them all wrong. And Mike had that same fighting spirit. He wanted to prove them all wrong. We had this program called Families as Teachers, where we got to invite residents into our homes to show them what our day-to-day life was like so that they would have a better understanding. And I always told them one story. I told them the story about that doctor who gave me my son's diagnosis as the elevator doors were closing and saying, yes, it's serious. And then another doctor. Only one Christmas did we ever have to spend in the hospital. And the night before, I remember walking around after Michael had fallen asleep, just tears, just crying. And that was for me. It was for me, what I was missing. And then when Michael woke up in that wagon full of toys, and one of his doctors, his last name was Dr. Johns. I don't remember his first name anymore, but he came in with a cup of coffee and a bagel. And the story I tell is, which doctor would you rather be remembered as? And to get them to understand that Michael is a person first and not a diagnosis on a page. When he needed to be intubated, I overheard the conversation in the hall that it's the mother that wants him to live. It's the mother that wants us to do all of these things. I heard it. I didn't react to it. I talked to Mike. I said, Mike, what's yes? And he raised his eyebrows. I said, Mike, what's no? And he closed his eyes. And I got the doctor and I said, you talk to him. And Mike talked to him and said he wanted anything and everything. That trach gave us another almost 15 years. And yes, Mike's life changed, but he adapted because he had the technology and the communication and the skills to use that. And so many others don't. Mike was able to communicate from the time he was trached in hospital because he had a MacBook Pro Steve Jobs sent to him. because Mike was the last Apple master for Apple computers. These were people that Apple recognized as being at the top of their field and using Apple computers. Gregory Hines said to me, whatever Mike needs, you ask for, because the universe will provide. And all of the technology that Mike had from Apple was at no charge. So one time, one of his computers broke and we had to take it in, and Mike was with us, and they said, well, we'll have to send it to be fixed. And Mike's like, no, I can't be without my computer. That's like trying to take away somebody's voice. And for a child and an adult with disabilities who that is their sole means of communication, it's not just communication. It's a signal. It's an alarm. It's I need you. I cannot breathe. All of these things that are so important that communication fulfills, they wanted to take away. And he said no. So they took the computer and back, and they started, and they saw the serial number. They came back out and they said, why didn't you tell us that this was from Steve? He truly left his mark with everyone in the computer industry, in the in the medical field. Doctors learned from my Mike. His doctor, who had taken him into the OR every 5 weeks for almost 15 years, since Mike had been trached, because he had a very tricky anatomy, so it wasn't safe to just do it in an office setting. He always did it in the OR. He came to Mike's birthday parties. He came to Mike's funeral. We had a relationship with him. We had a relationship with the doctors that we had, because we explained to them. And that day when that doctor said, it's the mom who wants him to live, it's the mom who wants all of that, he had to understand from us who Mike was and why he should want him to live. And the importance of building those relationships. I always tell parents, get them to know who your child is and why they matter, not only to you, but why they should matter to them. And doctors and nurses taught me some really good lessons. One taught me that don't brag about your skills and abilities when you've not worked on my son. I bring to you what you need to do for him. I am his voice. I'm not just some nasty mom that you just push to the side. I am a mother who understands and who has my son's best interests at heart, and I want you to as well. And I think Mike made me stronger. Fight for health, healthcare voter, and fight like a mom. We become fighters because we don't really have a choice. What I would say to people is just to treat someone as you would want your own child or your own friend to be treated. I think a lot of it is just kindness, compassion, and courtesy. I didn't always know how to talk to someone with a disability. I don't think people did know how to react. Children were always great. Children would ask like the best questions. Like one kid asked about, I kept seeing Mike, we were on a train going cross country, and he'd see us every day and he wouldn't speak. And finally, after like about the third day, he looked at Mike and he looked at me and he said, when did he come out of the coma? like what? I mean, yeah, we just laughed. And it's like, why did you say that? And he said, well, because he's so smart, but like he didn't grow. Mike was never large in stature. What I never liked was when a parent would say, oh, don't look, as if there was something hideous or heinous about the way Mike looked. Mike could do all of the things that other kids could do. He just did them differently. And that's why I think inclusion is so important, especially in education. But a lot of it is just explanation, education. And from that, sometimes people have to learn the hard way. And sometimes people just open their hearts and learn the easy way. When you look at the disability community, we are 1 in 4 voters. And it is broadened even further by those that have any relationship with that individual, families, caregivers, teachers, bus drivers, anyone who has come in direct contact with an individual. That turns into what we like to call the disability issue voter. These are people who understand what the lives of an individual with a disability is like, and they want to make sure politically that those issues are addressed. That's what I'm there for. And that's what we're there for, to teach them. because it, like you said, exclusion is not necessarily, intentional. I learned one lesson. I learned one lesson from a priest. It was from the Marian Healing Ministry. I had no idea what to expect when I went to one of these services. There were paramedics trucks outside, ambulances, people inside of this church with IV poles. And the priest said that all we have in life is what is. And those two words, what is, taught me more than I think anyone ever did up to that point. There are no could have been, should have been, would have been, maybes. It's just what is.